Have you ever found yourself questioning the very foundation of your sanity as your consciousness began to expand beyond the comfortable boundaries of ordinary perception? That terrifying moment when the walls of consensus reality start to dissolve, and you wonder if enlightenment and madness are simply two different names for the same earth-shattering experience? There is perhaps no more vulnerable state in the human experience than that liminal space between sleeping and awakening, where the mind hovers precariously between the familiar landscape of conditioned thought and the vast uncharted territories of expanded awareness. In this twilight zone of consciousness, many seekers find themselves grappling with what appears to be a complete breakdown of mental coherence, a dissolution so profound that they begin to question whether the path they have chosen leads to illumination or insanity. Tonight we explore together that most paradoxical and necessary phase of spiritual development, when the awakened mind seemingly goes insane before it can touch the deepest truths of existence. Consider for a moment the caterpillar in its final days before metamorphosis. As the transformation begins, the creature's entire cellular structure starts to liquefy, dissolving into what scientists call an undifferentiated soup of potential. From any external perspective, this process would appear to be nothing less than complete biological catastrophe. The caterpillar's organized form, its familiar patterns of movement and behavior, everything that defined its identity as a distinct creature, begins to melt away into apparent chaos. Yet this seeming destruction is not death, but rather the necessary prelude to becoming something infinitely more magnificent. The butterfly cannot emerge without this complete dissolution of the previous form, this apparent journey into biological madness that is actually the gateway to transcendence. So it is with consciousness, as it prepares to shed the limiting structures of ordinary perception and embrace the boundless possibilities of awakened awareness. The mind that begins to awaken often experiences what can only be described as a systematic dismantling of everything it once held to be true and solid. The concepts that previously provided structure and meaning start to reveal themselves as arbitrary constructions. Like stage props in a play, you suddenly realize you have been unconsciously performing for decades. The personality itself, that carefully constructed sense of who you are, begins to feel hollow and artificial, as if you were wearing a mask that had somehow fused with your face and is now slowly peeling away. Relationships that once felt natural and effortless become strained as you find yourself unable to participate in conversations that no longer resonate with your expanding perception of reality. The very language you use to communicate seems inadequate to express the profound shifts occurring within your consciousness, leaving you feeling increasingly isolated in your own inner experience. This dissolution of familiar reference points creates what many describe as a kind of spiritual vertigo, a disorienting sense of falling through space with no solid ground to land upon. The logical mind, accustomed to categorizing and controlling experience, finds itself utterly unable to make sense of the fluid, paradoxical nature of expanded awareness. Thoughts that once seemed coherent and linear begin to spiral into abstract loops that seem to lead nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Time itself becomes elastic and unreliable, stretching and contracting in ways that make ordinary scheduling and planning feel like exercises in futility. The awakening individual often finds themselves caught between two worlds, unable to fully inhabit either the conventional reality they are leaving behind or the mystical reality they are approaching. What makes this phase particularly challenging is the complete lack of external validation for what is occurring. The people around you, even those who care about you deeply, may begin to express concern about your mental state as you attempt to articulate experiences that lie far outside the boundaries of normal discourse. The very attempt to share your expanding awareness often results in worried looks, gentle suggestions that you might benefit from professional help, or worse yet, a kind of polite distancing as others begin to perceive you as someone who has lost touch with reality. This social isolation compounds the internal confusion, creating a feedback loop where the seeker begins to doubt their own perceptions and wonder if they are indeed losing their grip on sanity. I want to pause for a moment and speak directly to your heart. When was the first time you realized that your expanding consciousness was being perceived by others as a potential mental health crisis? That moment when someone you trusted looked at you with genuine concern and asked if you were feeling all right. not because you were in distress, but because your very presence had begun to emanate something that made them uncomfortable. I know this experience cuts deep because it forces you to confront the possibility that your spiritual growth might be indistinguishable from psychological breakdown, at least from the perspective of those who have never ventured beyond the safe boundaries of conventional awareness. The isolation you feel in these moments is not a flaw in your process, but an inevitable part of consciousness expansion that occurs when you begin to perceive layers of reality that remain invisible to most people around you. The tragedy is not that you are losing your mind, but that the language and concepts available to describe transcendent experience are so limited that they often sound like the ravings of someone who has lost touch with reality. This is why I want to invite you to share something with our community below. You can copy this phrase and complete it in the comments. I thought I was going insane when my awakening began to come on. Your experience, however strange or difficult it may have seemed, is a vital piece of the larger puzzle of human consciousness evolution. By sharing your story, you create a bridge of understanding for someone else who might be watching this video in the midst of their own dark night of the soul, wondering if the strange alterations in their perception signal enlightenment or madness. Your courage to speak about the seemingly insane aspects of spiritual awakening might be exactly what someone needs to hear to continue their journey with greater confidence and less fear. Remember that throughout history, every mystic, every sage, every individual who has touched the deeper truths of existence has had to navigate this treacherous passage between ordinary consciousness and expanded awareness. You are not alone in this experience, even when it feels like you are the only person in the world who has ever encountered such disorienting shifts in perception. Together, we form an invisible network of consciousness explorers, each validating the reality of experiences that the mainstream world cannot yet comprehend or accept. Now, let us continue to explore what happens when the mind must seemingly fragment before it can be reconstituted at a higher level of integration and understanding. The experience of going insane before touching truth is not a bug in the system of consciousness evolution, but rather a feature, a necessary passage that ensures only those with genuine commitment to transformation will complete the journey. Consider that every profound change in human history, whether in science, art, or spirituality, has required individuals willing to abandon the safety of accepted knowledge and venture into territories that others considered dangerous or impossible. The scientists who proposed that the Earth revolved around the sun, the artists who shattered conventional forms of representation, the spiritual teachers who challenged established religious authorities, all had to endure periods where their insights made them appear mad to their contemporaries. The awakening consciousness experiences this same dynamic on an intensely personal level, as it prepares to transcend the limitations that have defined its previous existence. What we call insanity in the context of spiritual development is often simply the mind's attempt to process information and experiences that far exceed its current capacity for integration. Like a computer trying to run software that requires more memory than it possesses, the ordinary mind begins to malfunction when confronted with the vast data streams of expanded awareness. Thoughts become fragmented, not because the mind is breaking down, but because it is being upgraded to accommodate a much larger and more complex understanding of reality. The apparent chaos is actually the sign of a system in transition, reorganizing itself to function at a higher level of sophistication and capability. During this chaotic phase, many awakening individuals report experiences that would be considered classic symptoms of mental illness by conventional psychiatric standards. They may hear voices or receive information from sources they cannot identify or explain. They might experience synchronicities so frequent and precise that causality itself seems to bend around their consciousness. Time and space may become fluid, allowing them to access memories, insights, or even prophetic visions that transcend the normal boundaries of linear experience. The ordinary sense of self may dissolve entirely, leaving them unsure where their consciousness ends and the larger field of awareness begins. From the outside, these experiences can indeed appear to be signs of psychotic breakdown, yet from the inside, they often carry a quality of profound truth and revelation that cannot be dismissed as mere hallucination. The crucial difference between genuine spiritual awakening and actual mental illness lies not in the nature of the experiences themselves, but in their ultimate trajectory and fruit. Authentic spiritual expansion, even when it passes through phases of apparent madness, eventually leads to greater integration, wisdom, and functionality in the world. The individual emerges from the chaos with enhanced clarity, deeper compassion, and a more sophisticated understanding of the nature of reality. Mental illness, by contrast, tends to lead to increasing fragmentation, isolation, and dysfunction over time. The awakening person may appear temporarily insane, but gradually becomes more sane than they ever were before, while the genuinely mentally ill person typically experiences a progressive deterioration of their capacity to navigate reality effectively. Yet this distinction is often impossible to discern during the midst of the transformation itself, which is what makes this phase so terrifying for both the individual experiencing it and their loved ones observing from the outside. The person going through spiritual awakening cannot point to external evidence that their experience is leading somewhere positive, because the benefits have not yet manifested. They must navigate by faith alone, trusting that the dissolution they are experiencing is ultimately constructive rather than destructive. This requires a level of courage that few people possess, the willingness to allow everything familiar to fall away without any guarantee that something better will take its place. The loneliness of this phase cannot be overstated. To be perceived as potentially mentally ill by people who care about you creates a profound sense of alienation that compounds the already disorienting effects of consciousness expansion. You find yourself unable to share the most significant experiences of your life with anyone, forced to maintain a facade of normalcy while your inner world undergoes revolutionary changes. The simple act of existing in ordinary social situations becomes exhausting as you constantly monitor your words and behavior to avoid triggering further concern about your mental state. You begin to live a double life, presenting an acceptable public face while privately exploring territories of consciousness that you dare not discuss with anyone. This enforced secrecy often intensifies the feeling that you might actually be losing your mind, since the isolation prevents you from receiving any external validation for the reality of your experiences. Without others to mirror back the legitimacy of what you are going through, you begin to doubt your own perceptions and wonder if the voice of caution from friends and family might be correct. The lack of a supportive community that understands the territory you are exploring can make you feel like you are wandering alone in a wilderness where the very ground beneath your feet might be quicksand created by your own deluded mind. But here is where the true nature of this challenging passage begins to reveal itself. The phase of apparent insanity is actually a necessary stripping away of all external authorities and reference points, forcing the awakening consciousness to develop its own internal compass for navigating expanded reality. If there were easy external validation for what you are experiencing, if everyone around you could immediately recognize and support your transformation, then you would never develop the kind of inner discrimination and self-reliance that genuine spiritual maturity requires. The apparent madness serves as a crucible that burns away dependence on external approval and forces you to trust the deepest wisdom of your own being. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of the entire process. The very experience that makes you feel like you might be losing your mind is actually the gateway to finding a more authentic and reliable form of mental clarity than you have ever possessed. The dissolution of ordinary thought patterns creates space for a more fluid and intuitive form of knowing to emerge. The breakdown of conventional logic allows access to the kind of paradoxical wisdom that transcends the limitations of linear thinking. The apparent fragmentation of personality makes possible a more integrated and flexible sense of identity that is no longer dependent on maintaining a fixed self-image. When you finally emerge from this passage, you discover that what felt like insanity was actually the birth pangs of a more expansive and resilient form of consciousness. The mind that seemed to be disintegrating was actually learning to function in an entirely new way, developing capacities that would have been impossible within the constraints of its previous organization. You realize that the period of confusion and disorientation was not a deviation from the path, but rather the path itself, the necessary journey through apparent darkness that makes possible the emergence of a more luminous form of awareness. The truth that emerges on the other side of this seeming madness is not a collection of facts or beliefs that can be easily communicated to others, but rather a direct and immediate knowing that transforms your entire relationship to existence. You discover that reality is far more fluid and responsive to consciousness than you ever imagined, that the boundaries between self and world are much more permeable than conventional thinking suggests, and that the universe itself is alive with an intelligence that is constantly communicating with those who have developed the sensitivity to perceive its messages. These insights cannot be proven or demonstrated in any conventional sense, yet they carry a quality of certainty that surpasses anything you previously considered to be knowledge. What makes this transformation so profound is that it occurs not through the addition of new information, but through the removal of the mental filters and assumptions that previously limited your perception of what was always already present. The awakened mind discovers that expanded awareness was never something that needed to be achieved, but rather something that needed to be uncovered by removing the barriers to its natural expression. The apparent insanity was actually the systematic dismantling of these barriers, the necessary deconstruction that makes possible a more authentic and unrestricted form of consciousness. Looking back on the experience, you often realize that every moment of confusion and distress was actually perfectly orchestrated to serve your highest development. The people who expressed concern about your mental state were playing their role in creating the pressure that forced you to develop greater independence and self-trust. The isolation you experienced was necessary to prevent you from being pulled back into the comfort of conventional thinking before your new understanding had time to stabilize. Even the doubt and fear you felt about your own sanity served to ensure that you approached the transformation with appropriate caution and respect for the magnitude of what was occurring. The mind that has passed through this initiation emerges with a kind of flexible stability that is far more resilient than the rigid certainty it previously possessed. Having learned to navigate the territory where the normal rules of logic and causality become fluid, it develops a capacity to remain centered and functional, even in the midst of paradox and uncertainty. The apparent madness becomes a form of advanced training in consciousness navigation, teaching skills that prove invaluable not only for spiritual development, but for creative problem-solving and adaptive thinking in all areas of life. Perhaps most importantly, you develop a profound compassion for others who are undergoing their own version of this transformative passage. Having personally experienced the terror of feeling like you might be losing your mind in service of finding deeper truth, you become a safe harbor for others who are navigating similar waters. Your presence alone can provide the kind of validation and support that you yourself so desperately needed during the darkest moments of your own journey. You become living proof that it is possible to pass through apparent madness and emerge not only intact, but fundamentally enhanced. The integration of this experience creates a unique form of wisdom that combines the precision of scientific thinking with the fluidity of mystical insight. You learn to honor both the rational mind and the intuitive knowing, understanding that each has its appropriate domain of application. The apparent contradiction between logic and transcendence resolves itself into a higher synthesis that includes and transcends both perspectives. You discover that true sanity is not the absence of unusual experiences, but rather the capacity to navigate multiple levels of reality with skill and discrimination. This integration process often takes years to complete, as the psyche gradually learns to incorporate the insights gained during the period of apparent chaos into a functional and sustainable way of being in the world. The challenge is not only to maintain access to expanded states of consciousness, but to translate the wisdom gained in those states into practical guidance for navigating the complexities of ordinary life. This requires developing what might be called a bilingual consciousness, fluent in both the language of transcendence and the language of everyday human interaction. The journey through apparent madness to authentic truth reveals that consciousness itself is far more vast and malleable than most people ever imagine. What we consider to be the fixed boundaries of mental functioning are actually arbitrary limitations that can be transcended without losing the capacity for effective action in the world. The mind that learns to dance on the edge of chaos without being overwhelmed by it develops a kind of creative flexibility that allows it to respond to life's challenges with unprecedented ingenuity and grace. Trust the process, even when it feels like you are losing everything that once provided stability and meaning in your life. Trust that the dissolution you are experiencing is not random destruction, but rather the careful dismantling of limitations that no longer serve your highest potential. Trust that consciousness itself is guiding this transformation with a wisdom that far exceeds the understanding of your ordinary mind. The apparent insanity is actually a form of divine intelligence, expressing itself through the temporary chaos that precedes every genuine breakthrough. What emerges on the other side of this passage is not a return to the mind you once possessed, but the birth of a form of consciousness that you never dared to imagine was possible. The truth you discover is not something you learn about, but something you become, and that truth is more beautiful, more free, and more authentically sane than anything you have ever known. If these reflections on the relationship between spiritual awakening and apparent madness have touched something deep within your being, know that you are not alone in questioning the boundary between enlightenment and insanity. This journey of consciousness expansion can feel profoundly isolating when those around you cannot understand the necessary dissolution that precedes authentic transformation. It is precisely for this reason that we have created this sacred space, this refuge for those who are willing to risk temporary madness in service of discovering ultimate truth. By subscribing to this channel, you join a community of fearless explorers who understand that the path to genuine sanity sometimes requires a willingness to appear completely insane to a world that has forgotten what authentic awakening looks like. Each video we share offers companionship for the journey through the wilderness of expanded consciousness, providing maps and guideposts for territories that few have the courage to explore. We are not here to offer simple reassurances or easy answers, but to walk together through the challenging terrain where ordinary reality gives way to extraordinary possibility. If you recognize yourself in these words, if you have felt the terror and exhilaration of a mind expanding beyond its previous limitations, this channel is your sanctuary. Subscribe and allow yourself to be supported by reflections that honor both the difficulty and the necessity of the transformation you are undergoing. Together, we form a network of consciousness pioneers, each supporting the others through the inevitable moments of doubt and confusion that accompany any genuine spiritual revolution. A simple click to subscribe is a quiet acknowledgement that says, I too am willing to risk everything for the sake of touching what is ultimately real. In a world that often pathologizes the very experiences that lead to the deepest wisdom, such recognition is not just valuable, but essential for the continuation of human consciousness evolution.